You're watching Public Comment every Thursdays at 8 a.m. The live stream. Detroit is different and Bridge Detroit. Local politics of Detroit. All right. Welcome back to Public Comment October 10th. And this is definitely in the throes of what I consider fall. And we love this Detroit fall. And with Detroit fall comes a lot of the topics we're usually talking about here at Public Comment. I am Khary Frazier of Detroit is Different. And weekly, every Thursday, I'm joined by the gentleman right here. Malachi, how you feeling?
I'm doing good, man. I'm gonna see some Tigers baseball, which is not usually something we have in fall. It is this year, so I'm excited for
Yeah,
that.
man. Yeah. I was shout out to Jim Leland that just got over into the Hall of Fame, vote and everything in Cooperstown. I remember them Jim Leland Tigers. We had Prince Fielder, Miggy, all of them years, and that was some good Tigers baseball into the fall. I still don't like the San Francisco Giants because of it. But yeah, the Tigers are back in the playoffs. Fall, you gonna be down there in a winter coat?
Yeah, it's cold today. I mean, this is a weird time of year where it's like 50 in the morning, and then by noon it'll be like 75, and you just how do you
Yeah, man.
dress for that? I don't know.
Yeah, good old Michigan weather. And with Michigan weather, we definitely thinking about the city of Detroit. And you deliver something. Usually, we base this on your notebook. The notebook is something that covers what the formal hearing of council, Detroit City Council, every week. Malachi goes in and gets a lot of details. And this week, formal session was celebratorial. Shout out to Juwan Howard and what he's doing with the Mojo Debate League and things like that. But inside of Bridge Detroit, where you're a journalist, you delivered one hell of an article that I want to unpack because you text me and said, hey, we may want to talk about this. And we're talking about the Downtown Development Authority. And I'm going to read a little bit, but before we read a little bit, do you want to say anything about public session this year, this week?
Yeah, I mean, there was I do. I mean, Flowers for Mojo Debate League. They got a Spirit of Detroit award, which we don't always cover those, but I think what they're doing is really cool.
Yeah.
They Juwan Howard basically bought a couple of lots near his neighborhood on the west side, and he turned them into this community space. And he's been teaching teens and young people in the city how to debate public policy issues. And I think it's really interesting because they'll actually take like Detroit City Council ordinances. Like there's one coming up we'll talk about probably in a couple of weeks here about animal keeping. They get the language of that, they split into two teams and they debate kind of with, is this a good policy, is this a bad policy? So it's creating this like pipeline for civic engagement. It's creating a kind of training ground for young people to learn about municipal politics and legislation and just public policy and how all this stuff works. So I thought that was really cool, and I'm glad to see him get some recognition. There was some funding that was given out for a couple of different projects. So the Alpha Phi Alpha chapter here in Detroit got some money to renovate its historic house in Brush Park. The city bought some extra voting booths in case there's a surge in turnout, but also to put at the early voting centers that are going to be opening up soon. There's going to be some new bus shelters and other kind of DDOT upgrades, which I'm interested to kind of learn more about.
Yeah, I
We're
was
doing some
I was
reporting on that.
definitely because the bus shelters is people would always say like, "What's your big gripe against bike lanes, Khary?" It's because more people take the bus here, and bus shelters for anybody that's taking the freight, jump the ship, taking the D dot, are definitely needed, not just because of the inclement weather, but also just the safety concern. You look at a lot of just open bus stops, especially like some of the open bus stops, like in construction. I drove past a person waiting on the Finkel the other day, and because of some of the construction being done around here, like damn near like right in the street, because it's like you gotta stand near the bus stop, but where do you go? So
Yeah, I mean, I ride the bus to city council on Tuesdays for the formal sessions. Pretty much 9 times out of 10, I ride the Mac bus down there or the Kirchhoff. I'm kind of by that intersection with Van Dyke, where either of those routes are pretty close to me. I mean, there's no shelters over there. They actually just installed one on in
there
Van
we
Dyke, one
go.
of the new ones. So that's nice, but it's on the other side of the street from the stop that I use. But I mean, like most, I forget the statistic. I want to say it's like 80% of the bus stops don't have
Yeah,
shelters. So this has been an issue for a while. There's been some community groups that have been kind of building them on their own, but the city's putting some more money into that. So
yeah,
yeah, stay
that's
tuned.
good. All right, so without any further to do, what you jumped into is something that the Detroiters for Tax Justice are always talking about. They're talking about the tax captures, but specifically the Downtown Development Authority. If you go back to the last time myself and Theo Pry of Detroit People's Platform and the Detroiters for Tax Justice were having a discussion, we really unpacked a lot about the DDA. The DDA is in the Downtown Development Authority. This is a great article. Now I change around the I guess the title of it because he has it kind of in the other order, but are Detroit neighborhoods paying the price for downtown growth? Detroit City Council and Citizens Research Council of Michigan. A new report commissioned by Detroit's City Council advises the halting the redistribution of taxpayer funds to downtown developments that yield only marginal benefits for the broader community. So this is from the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. It was a commission report from Detroit City Council looking into the impacts of the Downtown Development Authority. This was requested by City Council President Mary Sheffield, and it reveals that many Detroit residents do not gain from the controversial tax capture practices. A lot of the controversy about that is the work for Detroiters for Tax Justice because I was very unaware of what a tax capture was, let's say, as much as maybe 2.5 years ago until I was shared with the information from Detroiters for Tax Justice when I think of Russ Ballant's work in this. So for you all to understand what a tax capture is we will pay into our funds and millages and our taxes pay for public services. So we would say definitely like, okay, I want my tax money to go to schools, right? And schools is what I think taxes should go to. I think that that would add to the best quality of life for a city. And that actually is kind of what this report speaks to. A tax capture is like, okay, I know that a millage is for the school. I know a millage is for the library. I know the millage is for Wayne County Community College. But guess what? We're going to capture that tax and we're going to put it into something else. That something else became the Downtown Development Authority because in 1976, when Coleman Young, like Alexander Young, was mayor, what happened was you had a huge divestment in the retail corridor of downtown Detroit. Uh, as Black leadership took control and a hold of the city of Detroit, a lot of corporations left the city of Detroit, leaving, I guess what becomes in the '80s that feel of Detroit for RoboCop and Beverly Hills Cop and all of these movies, um, and this whole like hard, tough, rough, desolate downtown. And you all been to LA downtown, you know, you can kind of think of that. So for that, it was like, okay, we need to capture a lot of the taxes in this corridor and keep continuing to pouring back in to this. Hence the Downtown Development Authority, meaning that the 7.2 miles of downtown, those tax dollars are only going to be spent inside of that space. Great for 1976. Or I don't even want to say great, but it was it was a it was a practice and an idea and a concept that made a lot more sense for what was happening with the time in 1976. You fast forward, 50 years later into 2024. Well, almost 50 years later, and it's not the same idea. So much has shifted, so many realities have changed, and you're looking at libraries that still have not been open since COVID. And a lot of the Detroiters for Tax Justice are people that were into the Detroit libraries, and they were wondering, why the hell is the library closed? Because I keep looking at the money that's being spent as my tax dollars are going into the libraries, but library money is going into developments like Little Caesars Arena, District Detroit, a lot of things in and around throughout the city. This is what the Downtown Development Authority is doing. Many organizers and activists are adamantly against this because of a couple of things. It halts one, what was agreed to where tax money should go, and two, the development is only centralized and focused in downtown. So when people visit, they're like, wow, look at this, the NFL draft. But then you look at a neighborhood, hence the whole talk of, I think, the executive run of the Duggan administration has been about how do we strengthen the neighborhoods while keeping downtown intact as well. And it's always been a discussion of neighborhood versus Detroit. This report spoke specifically of when you do something like this, you create a tale of two cities. It naturally will come because you are putting most of your resources into one area. It'd be like playing Monopoly and you're putting all your hotels and your houses on one property, and your other properties you just not doing anything. You know what I'm saying? So this is the same type of thought process that kind of goes into it, and different thought processes about how effective it is. As you see, council member Fred Durrell that just announced his run for mayor is speaking on, as he said to this, do we need to do this for another 50 years? He can't say that, but if he does feel like if you change direction now, we could be put in a situation that could jeopardize our growth. And a lot of that goes into like the heavy costs that would go into already what's captured as far as what the debts owed. The debts right now, I think, to pay off everything for the DDA are going to last until 2040, what this report reports.
I think it's even more. I think it's closer to like 2050.
2050.
Yeah.
So with that already is like, something very hefty. So then you look at Gabriela Santiago Romero that speaks to this, that thinks, okay, something needs to be done about these tax captures. And frustrated with the report back. Some people feel that the report, it already was slanted. That was what was stated. And then you look at these numbers, and as I go to there, now I want your rebuttal of just kind of like an overview of this, because I believe we're going to be coming back to this, not just, more the rest of this year, but definitely leading into next year, because it's an electoral cycle. And here at Public Comment, we plan to interview all you all. If you're running, we want to interview. I'm talking about police commission, city council, mayor, uh, clerk, whatever you're running for. We want to make sure that we can capture that and get your scope on what you think should happen politically. And I believe that if you're going to be in legislative or executive offices of the city of Detroit, the DDA is something that is a hot topic that you cannot avoid and you must speak to. So I just gave an overview of some of the article and a little bit of a 2 cents. What's your take on this, Malachi?
Yeah, I mean, I think you described it pretty well. When this was created in the late 70s, it was amid a cratering of the downtown. We were dealing with white flight. We were dealing with retail businesses fleeing the downtown for the suburbs, office jobs fleeing downtown for the suburbs. I mean, it was a decline of the property values. And this was kind of created as an intervention to reverse that trend, to get downtown kind of back on track. I think the issue now that we're seeing is a lot of folks are questioning whether that is still required to keep downtown growing and to keep the investment there. Has enough momentum been built by the DDA, investing property taxes, which normally go to city services and libraries and schools and Wayne County institutions and parks across the county. Um, has that investment been enough that maybe we can start to bring more of that money back across the city instead of keeping it concentrated with the downtown? That's kind of the key question here. And part of that is because it's really just the kind of disparity of what the value being captured and redistributed in the downtown versus what is being directed back to the city budget is like so wide. There's a chart in the story. I hope you guys read it. I know it's a little long, but there's a lot of
There we
detail in
go.
there that's
Just pulled
important.
it up.
So that blue area, that's the base value. So this whole thing works. Tax increment financing works by basically you freeze the property value of an area at a certain point in time. So in 77, basically they froze that value and they said, okay, this is what the city is going to collect. Any growth from here is kind of peeled off the top and put to the DDA to use for a lot of like hard construction costs, a lot of like physical infrastructure. Um, and you see like as property values grow, more of that, the value that's collected by the DDA gets bigger and bigger to the point
And
where
wait,
now it's 4 times larger
and,
than
and
taxes collected by the city.
and I have to add this too, because this is a point from Detroiters for Tax Justice. So as that's happening concurrently, on the opposite side, on the opposite side, we have known that the city of Detroit has overtaxed residents for their home values.
Right.
So this is the other thing that's coming out the pot, So it's like corporations downtown are being capped at what they will be taxed, while you as a resident are being overassessed in taxes and being told from corporate counsel it's nothing that can be done about the overassessment of your taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the reality of what's happening too. Let's put that in the same bucket, even though I know politically the executive administration and definitely corporate counsel would say, well, one doesn't have anything to do with the other because they're not connected. But for you as a resident of the city of Detroit, hell yeah, it got something to do with one does with the other. So I just want to put that in perspective as well.
No, that's an important point, because that's tied into the idea of tax justice that these activists are pushing for. I think it all is very, very connected. So, the mayor's office will say that it's kind of laid a foundation for long-term growth. It's brought jobs to downtown. It's brought, income tax revenue along with that. And so basically that investment has been worth it. And to what Councilmember Durhal said, I think there's a general kind of concern that without these tax investments into development, that developers themselves will be like, well, maybe I shouldn't come to Detroit. Maybe I should go to some other city that's going to offer me more. So it's kind of like this development game too, is, this larger situation where, we're really throwing a lot of abatements and tax breaks and subsidies.
That's the other elephant in the room to me. It's like, is this fair business if you got to incentivize to the point where you're offering Miami billionaire Stephen Ross? I know he's a U of M grad, but still billions of dollars to incentivize him to do business in Detroit, with the thought process that possibly some of the incentives will encourage him to do more business in the city of Detroit. But the thought process is like, without those incentives, would he be doing business here? If you're I don't know.
I mean, Dan Gilbert is on the Forbes list of 400 richest men in America. He's number 27. He's in the top 30 richest men. And I think it said he had like $33 billion. So that's, people bring that up as well. Like
it's definitely that. I mean, I look at, bedrock properties throughout this downtown inside the downtown development authority. And I mean, can you walk more than 5 blocks without running into a bedrock property? I dare you. You know what I'm saying? 5 blocks, maybe even 2 blocks. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, as an entrepreneur, you think of the incentives, or like, let's just take it to something more casual. People always talk about dating. If you always have to like buy gifts and incentivize this person to like, accept your phone call and go out with you, I mean, how much are they present for you, or they present for the gifts? And that's the other big elephant in the room when it comes to business, because, what's the Downtown Development Authority in Manhattan, New York? What's the Downtown Development Authority on the Miracle Mile in Chicago?
They've compared it to Baltimore, in that, the city of Baltimore really relies on these as well, and have, they dealt with kind of a similar issue with their downtown and have put a lot of resources at, and it, there's this kind of community conversation about whether that is disproportionately affected neighborhoods and all that.
Effective model. This may be one of those other things similar to the ARPA funds. When I reached out to my brother that was city manager at the time of Baltimore, shout out Chris Shorter, that now runs county executive in Virginia, that could talk a little bit about that. I'm actually going to be in Baltimore not long from now, so I may reach out to some of the people I know in Baltimore politics about this, because I just don't know if you're so incentivized, and then you look at that chart, right? And then we look at the reality of other communities and the overtaxation. And right now, the most recent report from University of Chicago saying that citizens are still being overtaxed. And just like this research report, the executive administration and also certain city council members are looking at it like, this is just a joke, because they kind of came in with a slanted view. The reality is the Downtown Development Authority does exist. It does cap on what taxes could be. Residents of the city of Detroit were overassessed on their home values. Um, and you said possibly the 2050 just paying out what does exist. So how long will the can be kicked just on the debts that do exist? And then this is also running concurrent from the ashes of a bankruptcy that still, godmother, false bankruptcy, because the state of Michigan still owes the city of Detroit from the taxes that are due from the non-resident taxes, that agreement that Dennis Archer agreed to but never collected upon during that Engler administration. So that still stands. That still stands. State of Michigan still owes money. Something else that this current executive branch did not want to pursue, the debts from the state of Michigan to the city of Detroit. So that tale of two cities is a reality. And let me just bring it back down without any of the seasoning Khary puts on it. The reality. One, taxes are capped in downtown. Two, Detroit residents with homes were overassessed for their taxes. Three, it's going to take till about 2050 just to pay off what does exist already. Those are three realities, however you cut the cake.
Yep. I mean, I was going to bring it back to that. I mean, part of the problem, the council's talking about this whole thing was kind of created to decide, is it realistic to dissolve the DDA at some point? Well, the first report that the Citizens Research Council put out said it's really tough to get stuff built without some kind of incentive. So, abatements and tax captures are helpful in that way. This report talks a little bit more about how the problem is the unending nature of the tax capture, that even the way the state law is written creates a justification for this to never really go away. And also there's all this debt. I mean, $500 million in debt basically needs to get paid off from bonds that were used to build LCA and stadium improvements and a host of other things in the downtown. So, could we make some adjustments to the district, to reset the base value, so that more of that money immediately goes to the city's budget? I don't know. We're gonna have to see. The city council is having conversations based on this report, and they're split as we explore in the story. Some of them are more outwardly interested in dissolving the DDA. Council President Sheffield didn't wasn't prepared to talk to me about this report when we reached out to her, but has said in the past that she wants to dissolve the DDA. Santiago Romero, Whitfield Calloway have indicated the same. Other folks are not so sure. Durhal is interested in maybe expanding the DDA or expanding these kinds of like tax capture districts to boost commercial corridors, similar to how they did that around 8 Mile and Woodward to bring that like shopping district in. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I think you have the kind of financial reality that Carter laid out, but also the political reality that this is been a very important tool for the mayor's administration to revitalize the downtown, and past mayors as well. Um, and I think it's going to be tough for any future leader of the city
Yeah.
to tell developers that they won't have access to this kind of resource.
And here's the other elephant in the room, city of Detroit. As I get into my final thought, we'll definitely be revisiting this one. So this one was good because it's helping my critical thinking skills that I always encourage you all to be applying. That's what Detroit is different is for. Strengthening critical thinking skills.
There's a lot to this.
So the other piece that I really want to bring up that stands out, even as you were speaking about this, 16% voter turnout the last local election, which I do believe that politically there are politicians and agendas that exploit the apathy of voters. And when I speak to the argument for voter apathy, it bothers the hell out of so many people because it's like, oh, your people died for this and your people died for that. When you think about these millages and you go in and you vote for something like Detroit Public Schools or libraries, that should supersede whoever those elected officials are, and especially corporate business people, to capture that. So the other elephant in the room that's at cost with this is that itself. Democracy. If I vote for this and the money to be spent here, and it's still superseded in some workaround where it goes to something, even if that something is something that is adding to the quality of life of the municipality, what I vote for should stand. And when people vote for something and it doesn't stand, it only further creates and permeates an environment where people feel voiceless, which leads to the apathy that's very pervasive throughout the city of Detroit. 16% voter turnout of people that are on the voter rolls. Not to mention all the people that aren't on the voter rolls because car insurance is so high, or I think that's one of the key reasons, but just the people on voter rolls. So that's 16%. And that's with 2 extra weeks of voting, more ballot boxes than post office boxes throughout the city of Detroit. Like, every incentive and every option to vote is still there. So I believe a lot of these people not voting are making the choice not to vote because they don't see their vote changing anything. And these are the same people connected to the system saying that your vote changes something. And I vote for the money to be spent here, and it's not spent there. It's captured and spent someplace else. Right? So when I speak to this, I'm being real about this. Because what's the rebuttal to the person that's like, yo, my library down the street from here that I chose to move over here because I love this library. And I love the fact that I have kids and I'm across the street from a library. It's not been open since COVID-19 because the money for this library to be reopened is being spent downtown. What do you say to that person? And then they turn around and say, that's why I'm not voting. Okay? And I'm sure we'll come back and we'll revisit this. And this is definitely one of those crazy, Khary, saucy rants. But it's real. What do you say to that person? So that's my final thought. Malachi, what you got to say?
I mean, you said it all. bridgedetroit.com. That's where we're at. That's where you can read all of this coverage, dive more into the details. We've got the City Council Notebook every Wednesday morning. It's free, no subscriptions, no paywalls. It is news for the people, meant to be accessible. And sign up for it. Give us your email address. We'll send you free news. It's easy as that.
All right. Peace.
This is David Humphreys, also known as Hump the Grinder, producer of Hair Wars, getting ready for the Natural Hair Show 2024.
My Natural Hair Show 2024, Saturday, October 26th. You don't want to miss the creativity, the culture, and the community of all of this flavor and flair into natural hair. This is the 4th time around, and we're doing it bigger. Also, an international food marketplace. It's an experience that Saturday, October 26th, you do not want to miss. At the Andy Art Center, 3000 Finkel. Tickets on Eventbrite.